This is the story of Daniel Ashford and his wife Natalie Ashford. They had been married for 9 years when the silence between them began to feel less like comfort and more like something carefully maintained. Daniel was a private man, not cold, but contained, the kind of person who expressed love through presence rather than words. Through the mortgage paid on time and the coffee made before she woke, Natalie had married him for that steadiness, and then, somewhere in the middle years, had grown restless inside it. The story is not about a monster or a victim. It is about two people who stopped seeing each other clearly, and what happened when the fog finally lifted. Not gently, but all at once, the way fog sometimes does, leaving everything exposed in unflattering light. The Ashford house on Clemens Street had a kind of deliberate warmth to it. Natalie had decorated it herself: linen curtains, a kitchen herb garden, framed photographs arranged on the hallway shelf in a way that looked effortless, but had been rearranged at least a dozen times. Daniel had never touched those photographs. He understood, without it ever being discussed, that the house was her domain, and he moved through it carefully, the way a guest learns the layout of a borrowed space. He was 41, she was 37. He had made his money quietly, the way certain men do, not through spectacle, but through patience, a series of early investments in commercial real estate, then a pivot into private equity, then the acquisition of minority stakes in small and mid-sized companies that he identified as undervalued. Thornfield Partners, the firm he ran with 2 colleagues out of a building on the financial district's quieter edge, managed a portfolio most people would never have heard of. That was intentional. Daniel had a constitutive distrust of visibility. Natalie worked as a senior marketing director at Caldera Creative, a brand consultancy that had grown considerably in the 3 years since she joined. She was good at her job in the way that requires both talent and hunger. She understood what people wanted to believe about themselves, and she helped companies sell that back to them. The work energized her in a way that her marriage increasingly did not. This was not dramatic. It was not a collapse. It was simply that by the time they sat across from each other at dinner on a Tuesday in October, they had each stopped expecting the other to surprise them. "Long day?" Daniel asked. "The Harmon pitch took forever. We finally got it through, though." "That's good." "Yeah." She ate. He ate. The herb garden on the windowsill needed water, and neither of them had noticed in 3 days. It was around this time that Natalie began mentioning a colleague named Patrick Hale, not excessively, just a name that surfaced with increasing frequency, inserted into the ordinary reports of her workday, the way a new piece of furniture gets placed in a room and gradually stops being noticed. "Patrick thinks we should reframe the whole campaign." Patrick made everyone laugh at the all-hands. Patrick stayed late to help me proof the deck. Daniel noted it without commenting on it. He was not a suspicious man by nature, and he had learned over years of business that the first instinct to interpret a pattern was often wrong. He filed it, the way he filed most things, in a part of his mind he would return to when he had more data, what he didn't tell Natalie, what he had never told Natalie, not because he was hiding it, but because it had simply never seemed necessary, was that Thornfield Partners had, 18 months earlier, acquired a controlling stake in the investment group that held 90% of Caldera Creative's parent company. It was a clean acquisition, handled through layers of holding entities, the way these things usually were. The Caldera leadership knew the ownership structure. The staff did not, and had no reason to. Daniel was not involved in operations. He had never visited the office, never attended a board meeting in person. He was, in the language of the transaction, a silent majority owner. He'd mentioned it to Natalie once, in passing, early in the acquisition. Thornfield picked up something in the brand consulting space, and she had said, "Oh, interesting," and asked if he wanted more wine. It hadn't registered. He hadn't pushed it. Now, on a quiet Tuesday in October, her phone lit up on the kitchen counter while she was washing her hands at the sink. He wasn't looking for anything. He was simply nearby when it lit up. The message was from Patrick, Kane, the parentheses containing a colon, which Daniel understood, even without fluency in such things, was a smile rendered in text. Tonight was exactly what I needed. She came back from the sink, turned the phone face down without reading it aloud, and asked if he wanted tea. "No," he said. "I'm fine." He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the herb garden, which had gone slightly yellow at the edges. He made a note to water it in the morning. He didn't ask her about the message. This was partly restraint, and partly the particular discipline of a man who had spent his career learning that acting on incomplete information was almost always more costly than waiting. But it was also something else, a reluctance to arrive at a conclusion he wasn't prepared for. The message could mean nothing. The message could mean everything. He didn't yet want to know which. Instead, he watched. In the weeks that followed, with the quiet attentiveness he brought to balance sheets. She came home later, not dramatically, not every night, just a shift in the average, 20 minutes here, 40 minutes there, explained in ways that were entirely plausible and probably true. The Harmon campaign was in its final push. There was a new client pitch. The team had gone for drinks to celebrate. All of this was consistent with who she was, with the person he had known for 12 years and married in a garden in Connecticut on an afternoon that had been cold and bright and full of intention. But she had also started doing something small that he couldn't stop noticing. She checked her phone before she fell asleep, holding it at an angle that would have required him to lean over her shoulder to read, and she never fell asleep with it beside her anymore. She plugged it in across the room. "You moved your charger," he said one night, not accusingly, just observationally. "I read that having your phone by the bed disrupts your sleep cycle," she said. She didn't look up from the book she was holding. He said. The book was open to a page she hadn't turned in 15 minutes. He lay in the dark afterward and thought about Patrick Hale, whom he had never met, whose name he had looked up on the Caldera website one afternoon at his office desk with a feeling of careful neutrality. Patrick was 34, the site said, senior copywriter. A photograph showed a man with an easy smile and the kind of casual attractiveness that reads as approachable rather than threatening. The bio said he had previously worked in London. It said he was passionate about brand storytelling. Daniel had closed the tab and gone back to the acquisition report he was reading. 3 weeks later, he asked her directly, not confrontationally, but plainly, sitting at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning with coffee going cold between them, "Is there something going on with you and this Patrick?" Natalie looked at him. Something moved across her face. Not guilt precisely, but the adjustment of a person recalibrating in real time. Then her expression settled into something that seemed like honest discomfort, which he found harder to dismiss than denial would have been. "He's a friend," she said. "A real one. We talk a lot. I like talking to him." "What do you talk about?" "Things. Work. Ideas." She paused. "He listens. He's interested in what I think." The implication landed quietly. He received it without flinching. "I listen," he said. "I know." Her voice was careful, not cruel. "You do. But it's different. With Patrick, there's an energy. It's creative. It's not." She stopped. "Not what?" She looked at her coffee. "Not obligatory." The words sat between them. He understood what she was telling him, more perhaps than she had intended to tell him. She was not admitting to anything physical. She was admitting to something she had probably been turning over privately for months. Something about need and attention and the intoxication of being genuinely seen by someone new. She was giving him the more honest version, and he found he was not grateful for it. "Is it physical?" he asked. "No," she said, and she met his eyes when she said it, which meant either that it was true or that she had decided it would be. He believed her, not entirely, not in the unthinking way he might have believed her a year earlier, but enough to choose to believe her, which was different, and which he understood was its own kind of decision, with its own consequences. "Then be careful," he said. She nodded. He got up and watered the herb garden. It was alive again, barely. The invitation to Caldera Creative's annual end-of-year party arrived through a general outreach to the holding company's principals, a formality, a gesture of institutional goodwill. Daniel almost declined. He had declined for 2 previous years, but something in him wanted to see it, not to confirm anything he told himself, just to see. He RSVP'd under the Thornfield name, which no one at Caldera would recognize, and he went. The venue was a converted warehouse in the design district, the kind of event Natalie had described to him in general terms over dinner the previous week. Should be nice. Good venue. She had not invited him, and he had not told her he was going. He arrived at 8, when the room was full enough to be anonymous in. He was in charcoal trousers and a dark jacket, the uniform of a man who wanted to look appropriate without being looked at. He got a drink from the bar and stood at the room's edge in the way that felt natural to him, watching the texture of the crowd. He found her by sound before he found her by sight. Her laugh, which he knew well and which had not been directed at him in some time, a warm and open sound that she made when she was genuinely entertained rather than socially performing. She was standing near the large windows at the room's far end, and beside her was a man Daniel recognized from a small photograph on a professional website. Patrick Hale was taller than Daniel had registered from the photo. He was standing close to Natalie, not indecently, but in the way people stand when they have decided the usual distance is unnecessary. And he had his hand briefly on her arm while he finished a sentence, and Natalie's posture had that particular quality Daniel recognized from the early years of their marriage: open, angled toward, lit from within. He watched for perhaps 15 minutes. Nothing explicit happened, but the kind of intimacy on display was not the intimacy of colleagues, and it was not the intimacy of friends who have simply grown comfortable. It was the intimacy of two people in the middle of something, not at its edges. When Patrick said something and she laughed again, turning slightly so her shoulder touched his, Daniel put his glass down on the nearest tray and walked toward them. She saw him at the same moment she registered that she should be frightened. Daniel. His name came out of her with a quality he had never heard before. Surprise, certainly, but underneath that, a falling sensation, like a person who has misjudged the last step of a staircase. Natalie, he said. His voice was even. He looked at Patrick Hale, who had taken a small, involuntary step sideways. You must be Patrick. Patrick extended his hand. That's right. And you're Daniel Ashford. He shook the hand. Natalie's husband. A pause that lasted a moment too long. I didn't know you were coming tonight, Natalie said. She was recollecting herself, arranging her expression towards something that might pass for composure. I wasn't planning to. He looked around the room. It's a good venue. How did you even get an invitation? He looked at her then, not with anger, not with the heated righteousness she might have expected, but with something calm and slightly sorrowful and informed by a patience that had been building for months. I'm a Thornfield principal, he said. We received a courtesy invitation. She frowned. Thornfield? Thornfield Partners acquired the holding company for Caldera's parent group last year. He said it simply, the way he would state any fact. I own about 90% of this company. The color left her face in a way that was gradual and terrible to watch. Patrick went very still. That's, she started. I should let you both enjoy the evening, Daniel said. He looked at Patrick once more briefly, without hostility but without warmth. Then he set down his glass. I'll be home late. He walked out. He did not look back, because looking back would have required him to see her face, and he didn't think he could hold his composure if he saw her face. The night air was cold and specific. He stood on the pavement for a moment, then called a car. In his chest was not rage, but something else. A dense, sorrowful clarity. The feeling of having known something for a long time and finally agreeing to know it. He moved to the guest room that night without ceremony. Not dramatically. He simply did not go to their bedroom. He slept badly, rose early, and went to the office before she woke. She called him at 10:30. He let it ring and called back at noon. I need to explain, she said. You don't have to. Daniel, I'm not angry at you. He meant this, which confused her. I think I've known something for a while. I just wasn't ready to deal with it. It wasn't what it looked like. He was quiet. I mean it wasn't. She stopped. Started again. I was never going to leave you. I know, he said. He believed this too, and it didn't make anything better. In the weeks that followed, Caldera Creative's new ownership structure became known internally, not because Daniel announced anything, but because these things surface eventually, and several senior people at the holding company had seen the name Ashford at the event and made connections. The news moved through the office quietly, and then less quietly. Patrick Hale resigned in February. His resignation letter cited a desire to pursue other opportunities and was accepted without comment. Daniel was not involved in this. He had no operational role, made no phone calls, sent no emails. He simply did not intervene when the natural pressure of the situation resolved itself. This was, he understood, a kind of action. He did not pretend otherwise to himself. Natalie continued at Caldera for 3 months after the party, carrying the weight of what everyone now knew or suspected. She was professional. She delivered her work. She came home at regular times and made the kinds of dinners they had eaten together for years. She tried, with a thoroughness that was both genuine and calculated, to reinstate the life they had had. She was good at this, in the same way she was good at marketing. She understood what people needed to believe, and she worked to provide it. But Daniel had changed in a specific way that made the reinstatement impossible. Not coldly, not with cruelty. He was not the kind of man who turned punishing, who withdrew warmth as a weapon. He was simply present in the house the way he had always been, and that presence now felt to both of them like a verdict. The coffee was still made before she woke. The mortgage was still paid. He still listened when she spoke, but something essential in his attention had shifted direction, had turned inward, and Natalie could feel it the way you feel a draft through a window that looks closed. She asked him in March whether he wanted to see a therapist together. He said he would think about it. He thought about it for 2 weeks, and then told her he didn't think it would help, and she accepted this without the argument he had half expected. In April, she found a flat, not because he asked her to leave, but because living in the house had become a form of punishment she was administering to herself, and she was tired of it. She told him over dinner on a Wednesday, their herb garden behind her on the windowsill, now thriving and attended to. "I found a place," she said, "in No Valley. It's small but light." "Okay," he said. "I think it's the right thing." "I think so too," he said, not coldly, honestly. She nodded and ate the rest of her meal, and they cleared the table together without speaking, in the practiced way of people who have shared a kitchen for many years. She came back for her things on a Saturday in May, when the city had finally finished with its winter gray and become something softer. Daniel was home. They had agreed on this, both of them understanding without saying it that a clean goodbye required witness. He helped carry boxes, not out of performance, not to demonstrate anything. It was simply that there were boxes, and he was present, and it was the practical thing to do. They moved around each other carefully, sorting the accumulated evidence of 9 years into what was hers and what was his and what had been so thoroughly shared that neither of them could make a claim. She kept the framed photographs from the hallway shelves. He kept the French press and the extra set of keys she'd had cut for her sister years ago that had never been collected. By mid-afternoon, the flat had developed the particular echo of a room in the process of being emptied. Natalie stood in the kitchen doorway with a canvas bag over one shoulder, looking at the space where they had eaten together 1,000 times. Daniel was leaning against the counter. Neither of them was crying. They had been crying earlier in the year, not shouting, not scenes, just the quiet kind that happens at unexpected moments in the car or early in the morning before either of them was ready to be awake. "I want you to know," she said, "that I'm sorry, not as a thing I'm saying, as something I'll carry." He looked at her for a moment. "I know," he said. "I believe you." "Was it?" She stopped, tried again. "Was there a point where you would have stayed if things had been different?" It was a real question. He took it seriously. "I've thought about that a lot," he said. "I think the problem wasn't what happened at the party. I think we'd already been in separate rooms for a long time. The party was just..." He paused. It was just the light coming on. She nodded slowly, and he watched something settle in her face. Not peace exactly, but the recognition of a truth she had already known and had been waiting to hear, said plainly, "I made you invisible," she said. "The way you feel when someone looks at you but doesn't see you anymore. I did that. I let myself be invisible," he said. "There are 2 sides to that." She looked at him with something that might have been, in a different life, love reasserting itself, but they were too far past the point where assertion could do anything useful, and they both knew it. She picked up the last bag from the counter. At the front door, she paused with her hand on the frame, not dramatically, just the natural hesitation of a person about to cross a threshold they will not cross again in the same way. "Take care of the garden," she said. "I will." She left. The door closed behind her with the ordinary sound of a door, which is to say, no sound at all commensurate with what it meant. He stood alone in the kitchen for a while, not moving, listening to the street sounds filter in through the window. Somewhere outside, a neighbor was doing something ordinary. A car passed. The city continued. He looked at the herb garden on the windowsill. Rosemary, thyme, a small pot of basil he had started from seed in February, tending it through the coldest part of the year. It was full and green and needed nothing from him today. Some things, he thought. Not with bitterness, not with satisfaction, but with the particular exhausted honesty that comes after long grief. Some things you tend faithfully for years, and they still don't survive the winter. And some things you almost let die, and something in them persists anyway, past the point where persistence seems reasonable. He had spent 9 years trying to understand which kind of love his marriage was. Now he knew. He was not sure that knowing was the same as being healed, but it was at least the beginning of being honest. The afternoon light moved across the kitchen floor in the unhurried way of light that has no obligation to anyone. He put the kettle on. He made tea. He sat down alone at the table where they had eaten 1,000 meals, and he drank it while it was still hot.